Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, August 15th. We are so happy that you found your way to us. My name is Heather Kraus, and I'm a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. And what We All Count loves to do is build tools and provide training for anybody that wants to find practical, concrete, real world ways to align the data projects that they're working on with their equity goals, with the communities that they are genuinely trying to center and support. And one of the things that we do over the past 4 years or so is gather together on Fridays for about an hour to do something that we call Talking Data Equity. And Talking Data Equity is an informal community event. It's open, it's drop-in. We don't charge money for attendance. And I'm putting in the chat the homepage to Talking Data Equity. So you can always check there to see what our topic is, or if we have a special guest, and decide whether it's a good Friday for you to attend or not. And the Zoom link stays the same. So if you found your way here today, you can always find your way back because the Zoom link is going to be the same. And what we're doing today is we are having a few special guests who are working on one of my absolute favorite projects. I am so proud and excited to be able to introduce you to these amazing people and their project. Before I introduce you, I'm going to just do a tiny bit of housekeeping. I don't want to use up too much time, but I know that we do have people who are attending for the first time, and welcome. We're so excited that you are here with us. And of course, to the people who come every week, we would not be a community without you. So thank you. How this is going to work is this is a Zoom meeting, which means that you have controls over your own video and microphone settings. And we're going to ask that you keep your microphones turned off while our special guests are sharing some slides, telling you about their project, sharing some examples. During that time, feel free to use the Zoom chat. We have the Zoom chat set up so that you can talk to everybody if you want to put in a reflection, ask a question, share a response, or if you want to just communicate only with me, you can go up to the top of the Zoom chat and you should be able to push that plus button. That's a new thing in Zoom. So instead of being able to use the drop down, you have to use the plus button, and you can chat directly to me. If you'd rather maintain your privacy, that's completely fine. You can ask a question directly to me and I will amplify it without using your name. Last thing is, because I know that you'll start asking this immediately upon me sharing the special guests, we are sharing the recording and we will link to all the resources and the many fabulous projects our special guests bring with them. We will link to all of that in the Data Equity Community Forum, and I put a link to that as well in the chat. So you do not have to write down everything or capture every link. We'll make sure that you have access to that. So sit back, enjoy, because this is a very special day. I am here to introduce you to an amazing group of people that I met when I was attending their project, Data Against Feminicide. I practiced that so many times before this. I've been practicing it for like 90 minutes. And let me introduce you to our four special guests who are all working together. Helena Suarez-Val is a feminist researcher and an anti-feminicide activist, and she's the founder of Feminicide Uruguay and the co-founder of Data Against Feminicide, a global project that aims to understand and support activists engaged with technology and data to end violence against women. With expertise in participatory action research and digital tool co-design, she has worked with civil society organizations around the world to support the production of feminist data, particularly on gender-related violence. Guest number 2, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to is Dr. Harini Suresh, professor of computer science at Brown University with affiliations in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society, as well as the Center for Technological Responsibility, Reimagination, and Redesign. And she leads something called the Disco Lab, which is totally cool name, which stands for Data in Society Collective. And they study how to support individual and collective agency in technological design, use, and refusal. Our third guest that we offer a very warm welcome to is Isadora Krushin, professor in business and society at the Queen Mary University in London. Her research focuses on the political economy of sustainable development, with particular interest in how political mobilization shapes capitalist development and possibilities for addressing structural inequalities. She investigates these dynamics through the lenses of social ecological infrastructure, such as water, data, and AI systems, including their financing and governance. And Dr. Krushin currently co-leads Data Against Feminicide. And last but very much not least, because Dr. Gao has done a lot of the logistics making this happen, Ouya Gao is a PhD student in computer science at Brown University. Her research focuses on understanding the societal impacts of AI systems through a socio-technological perspective, and she supports grassroots and community-driven AI systems that empower marginalized communities. Oh, not a doctor yet. Okay, well, soon to be doctor. So you can see why I am so excited. Let me turn it over to you and your slides. And as I said, feel free to use the Zoom chat while we listen. Keep your microphones turned off, and we'll have time for microphones on discussion at the end.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you, Heather, for that amazing introduction. I feel like, woo! So, and we're very happy to be in conversation here. Just before we everybody came on, we were saying about how we want to make sure that everybody knows about our project, but mostly about the work that activists all over the world have been doing to counter feminicide using data. And so today we're going to be telling you about a particular aspect of our project, which has to do with the possibility of developing a feminist AI that is in line with our work to counter feminicide with data and technology. So we're going to be talking about that today. So just to tell you a little bit about how the conversation is going to be structured. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time introducing our team members because Heather has done such an amazing job of that. Then we're going to tell you a little bit more about the Data Against Feminicide project, just so that you can contextualize the conversation that we're having. And then we'll be telling you more specifically about this project that we're calling News Narratives and Feminist AI, just so that you can see how we're approaching this question of whether a feminist AI can be developed. Next slide, please. So who we are, but as we always like to say, we lead projects that many people are participating. All our projects are participatory and collaborative. So we're facilitators of a process that involves many more people. So who we are more in general is represented here. It is a Data Against Feminicide project. I'll tell you a little bit more in a second. And the Disco Lab, the Data in Society Collective, founded and led by Harini Suresh, just here. So we've been actually collaborating in the project since the beginning of Data Against Feminicide. And then Harini's gone on to create this lab and continue to work on the project from there. Let's go. Yes. So what is feminicide? You might be wondering. And it is one of the hardest words to pronounce. It's partly on purpose that it was created thus. So, femicide or feminicide, as you can choose to call it, is a way to name gender related murders of women and girls. And it is very important that we think about gender related. So it's not any murder of a woman or girl. It is those where gender has had a component, where the gender structures that separate a binary into women and men, and which assigns those two roles separate values and separate roles, where that binary, that system has had a role in that form of violence. It necessarily includes then cis and trans women, because of course the gender structure has a lot to do with the gender identity of the victims and how it's expressed. And it relates in particular to how women, whether cis or trans, are less valued in that binary system in society. When we're thinking about feminicide, we're also looking at an intersectional lens. What that means is gender is an entry point to understand this form of violence, but we shouldn't ignore all the other forms of oppression where people are imbricated that will affect how violence expresses itself. So it is not the same how Black women experience violence, how Indigenous women experience violence, disabled women experience the violence. And those particularities are very important. So this term feminicide, which is difficult to pronounce, includes all those aspects in it. And more than anything else, the reason a kind of slightly different word was created rather than just use homicide of women or murder of women is to locate it as a human rights violation, to signal that states have a responsibility, because all states have responsibility to guarantee their citizens their rights, their human rights, and for the most part, states are not guaranteeing women a life free of gender-related violence. In Latin America, we have several laws that speak to this. In fact, in my country, Uruguay, we have a law that says exactly that. It's a law to guarantee women a life free of gender-related violence, and it doesn't work yet. So this is just to kind of put you in perspective of what feminicide is, but it's not something that just has been happening to women. Women and activists worldwide have been taking measures to counter feminicide with different strategies. The picture you see here in this slide is from the Ni Una Menos protest. Ni Una Menos means not even one less. We don't want even one less woman lost to gender-related violence, and it's a movement that started in 2015. It spread from Argentina across the Americas, but also to Europe and other parts of the world. And it's part of a kind of series of global movements that have been coming. Some people call it the fourth wave of feminism, but in general, they come from a very long genealogy of activism against gender-related violence. This Ni Una Menos happened in 2015. Also in 2015, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women called on all countries in the world, all member countries, as they say, to establish femicide observatories. This is it's an important context to have. So the UN was calling on its members to have observatories, but the members were not necessarily responding. And in fact, very few countries have fully fledged observatories on feminicide. But activists have been doing this work. And should we come to the next slide? Our project Data Against Feminicide was born in that context. So in 2019, myself, Catherine D'Ignacio, and Silvana Fumega met. We didn't know each other before, but the three of us were working separately on things related to feminicide and to data. And we decided to start a project which is now 5 years old or 5 years young, a project which we're hoping will end because we don't want to be doing this work because we want violence to end. But this project has had three kind of key aspects. It is a qualitative project where we're trying to understand the work that activists have been doing to record, to visualize, and to use data as a means to counter feminicide, as a means to do activism, advocacy, and so on. It is also a participatory design project because what we've set out to do is not only to understand the practices of activists, but also to provide tools that might support those activists in their work. And in particular, we wanted to address the emotional labor and the cognitive labor of doing the recording and monitoring of feminicide. And it is also a growing global community of practice. So we now have over 2,000 people that have participated in some of our projects or are on our mailing list or have come to our events. This is we call the community of practice anybody who's interested in working with data on feminicide. So that we try to create spaces for the community to learn from each other, to exchange, and to try and hone their strategies to use technology and data in the struggle against feminicide. And we have this great 5-year report that Isadora here and Alessandra Junta Almeida wrote, where we have an overview of the project, what the project has been. We have the results of a survey that we did from people who have people and groups that have been working in the project, and you can download it. You can download it. I see in the chat that the QR is not working, but we can, yeah, but the link is there in the chat. So if you want to find out more about the project, you can see it there. Yes, and I think now I'll pass on to Isa. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Alice, for putting the link to the report on the chat as well. So, like building on this background that Elena provided, we thought we would provide just a kind of snippet of some of the work that we've done to build tools to support the work that activists do to monitor and produce data on feminicide. So I just want to also clarify that we don't produce data ourselves, like we don't see that as part of our role, right? Our primary aim is to support the work that activists are doing because they have the contextual expertise to do the monitoring in the context that they are engaged in. So one of the, like as part of this project over the last 5 years, we've interviewed dozens of activists and civil society groups across various countries in the Americas, in Europe, in sub-Saharan Africa, that produce data against feminicide. And one key challenge that we identified across these efforts was the challenge of reading through violent news content. So the majority of the civil society groups and activists, they rely on news articles to identify cases of feminicide, whether that's as a primary source or as a secondary source. And we've written about this in some of our other work, and also kind of summarized this in the report that Elena mentioned. So we decided to organize co-design sessions with activists to think about how we could address some of these challenges of producing data about feminicide. And through these sessions and workshops, the idea emerged to develop tools that could help to both filter news articles, so kind of reduce some of the emotional labor and manual labor that Elena mentioned of having to read through a lot of violent news content. And also to facilitate the identification of relevant information in news articles. So I'll just very briefly walk you through a couple of the tools that we've developed. So one of them is an email alerts platform. So for this platform, we engaged in collaborative data annotation with activists who produce data against feminicide in different contexts, primarily in the languages, in the following languages: Spanish, English, and Portuguese so far. And yesterday we had the great joy of launching the tools for Swahili as well. So we engaged in collaborative data annotation so that we could like leverage this contextual understanding and expertise that activists do have in building a data set to train a machine learning classifier that would then filter through news articles and identify those that could be more likely to concern feminicides. So the platform essentially draws on media catalogs that we have access to through our partner Media Cloud, and then filters the articles that are pulled from these platforms through the machine learning model and forwards them to activists through email, or they can access them via the platform. You can see here that it also compiles the articles that refer to the same case. So that also reduces the work of having to go through multiple links and so on. We are happy to talk more about these tools later if you're interested. Elena also put the link on the chat for how you can learn more about them. The second one is a highlighter. It's a browser extension that kind of highlights keywords in a news article as the activist or person is going through them to kind of help make it a little easier to identify information that the activists might be interested in recording. So through this browser extension for Chrome, you can set your own keywords that you would like to be highlighted if there are particular things that you're interested in monitoring. And you can also open an Excel or a Google Sheet database to more easily transfer information into your records. So those are the two tools. We know that right now we have more than 65 groups across more than 15 countries that are using these tools. But we also know that there are challenges that persist. So I'm going to hand it back to Elena, who is going to talk about the challenge that we're concerned with at the moment.
Thank you, Isa. So, you probably have gathered by now that the media have a super important role in our project, mainly because, by transitive, because it has a really important role in the monitoring of feminicide. As Isa mentioned, most of the monitoring is done through the news. I mentioned already that most countries do not have official data set or have very scarce data, or sometimes they have very sporadic data. So the media end up being one of the key players in providing a source on feminicide data. And most of the activists, including myself for my own project, Feminicide Uruguay, we do the monitoring of the media. And so the media have this really important role. In kind of like a small sense, they have this role that I'm mentioning as a source of data for activists. But then there's a bigger sense in which the media have an important role. And through the experiences that activists have shared and families as well have shared, families of victims of feminicide have shared, we find that there's two key roles of the media. So the first is the media as producers of culture. So how the media portrayed feminicide, how they report it, which cases they report, whether they contextualize it as a systemic and structural issue or not is important. And they also have a really important role in keeping the search for justice alive, meaning that if they help keep cases on the public imagination, then it's more likely that the search for justice will continue, and there might be a potential for a better outcome for the families left behind after violence. So indirect source of data, keeping the cases alive, and producers of an imaginary about feminicide, about what kind of problem it is. It can do all of these things, but it can also not do them, right? And so we found that actually often media coverage of feminicide re-victimizes survivors and victims by, for example, putting questions such as why did she go out so late at night and so on. So placing the blame on the victim. It fails to situate the violence as a structural problem. Often it will be framed as unimaginable violence, or nobody understands why this happened, or shocking, when it's actually something that's part of a structural systemic form of violence that has been well understood for years through academic and activist thinking. It often tends to reinforce discrimination, whether it is through how things are reported or through lack of reporting. So some forms of feminicide will be less reported than others. And if it does all of those things negatively, then it contributes to state negligence and public inaction, because it fails to locate, it just reproduces this idea that it's something we cannot do, we have to accept, it's just part of life, it's natural, it's normal, right? The image you see there is the work of Mexican activist who calls herself La Corregidora, the corrector. And she has a social media account where what she does is she corrects news reporting. And so what you see there, it's all the scribbled, like a bad coverage, and then she scribbles on top of it, and she creates, and she puts notes of how it might have been better covered, better written, to better contextualize the violence and so on. And so this actually was one of the inspirations for the project that we're going to be telling you about now. So we kind of started to wonder, could it be possible to use AI to look at narratives of feminicide in the media, and to think about how they could be improved? And so what we decided to do is we decided to work on exploring this potential for feminist AI process. And I feel like we're tackling two problems here that are quite separate, but not necessarily completely separate. One is the problem of coverage, media coverage, and feminicide. And then the other is AI development, which emerges as a new problem that also has gendered, intersectional aspects that we need to be wary about. So our project is very much intended to focus on news coverage of feminicide, but it's also intended to try and understand the development of an AI tool, and what of that development could be done in a feminist way. And I think I was supposed to speak more to the slide, but I think, Harini, maybe I'll let you go on now with the objectives, more particular objectives of the project.
Sounds good. We can go to the next slide, maybe. Yeah, so our goal with starting off, I mean, when we started this project initially, we had, inspired by the image that Elena showed, we were thinking like, what if we could have a tool that could do this, that could sort of make these corrections and identify what was wrong and say like, hey, you should change this to this, or like, this is really like sexist, or this is victim blaming. And so we had this idea in our heads of like, oh, maybe we could build something like that. But the more that we thought about it, we realized that like, wait a second, like we don't even know the full range of things that are good practices, that are bad practices. How do we actually formalize what this taxonomy is? And so we started going more and more upstream in this process to the data collection stage itself. And so what we've been doing now, or like our initial goal is like, let's figure out like, what are good practices actually, and what are bad practices, and how do they appear in articles across different contexts? And are there differences across different contexts? Is something that is considered bad in one context actually fine in another context? So we really wanted to attend to like the context specific nature of this work and bring in people with local expertise to inform the taxonomy and the data set. And so just a step back a little bit, when we were thinking about this process of like, okay, we want to design a taxonomy, we want to annotate data, we want to sort of do what is in traditional AI development like called data work. We wanted to reflect a little bit on how to actually start that process. And so data work generally is a huge sort of part of AI development that underpins all modern AI systems. And this has been sort of termed in previous research like invisible human infrastructure. So there are sort of thousands of data, millions maybe, like underpinning all of the data sets that are fed into AI systems, including large language models that are increasingly sort of talked about today. And there's been also a lot of work on how this process of annotation, of people sort of being brought in to evaluate models, to mark models, to mark content as toxic or not toxic, is outsourced to other countries, especially in the global majority, and is typically sort of not very well acknowledged, is very low paid. And this headline in the bottom right is from last year. At the end of last year, there was a lawsuit filed against Meta from content moderators in Kenya who were working like 10 to 12-hour days, just looking at terrible content to try to filter it out of people's news feeds. But it's common that I think many Facebook users had no idea that this was happening in the back end, and this work was very poorly compensated. So many of these moderators were diagnosed with PTSD and suffered sort of long-term mental health consequences, which was the sort of prompt for the lawsuit. And I realized I'm saying data annotation, but I just wanted to clarify that data annotation, specifically in the broader data work process, is the process of labeling data with categories or tags of interest. So I mentioned content moderation as one of these, as an example of this. Another example you might think about is people who label sort of things in images or videos like cars and people, and that data might be used to train autonomous vehicles, like self-driving cars. And there's a range of different tasks here. If you've ever filled out like one of those CAPTCHA things where it asks you to like click all the things with traffic lights, you may have inadvertently been contributing to data annotation for some machine learning system. So yeah, like I mentioned, data annotations, typically there's like developers or researchers at a company or a research lab who are sort of deciding, okay, here's what we want our system to do. So in order to do that, we have to collect this data. Here's the categories we want to annotate. Maybe that's like cars, people, traffic lights, or depending on the domain, it may be, toxic content, non-toxic content. And then we sort of define this task, send this information to sort of faceless people on a annotation platform. A really popular one is Amazon Mechanical Turk. Those annotations are sent back, and then the developers sort of design the system, evaluate the system based on those annotations. So it's quite separate, and often the annotators, not of their own fault, but don't really like understand anything about the context of where the data is, what the data is being collected about, or what the data will be used for, or have much insight into like any other part of the process. So thinking about this, we wanted to return to the idea of a feminist AI. And so we turned to feminist thinkers, specifically like intersectional feminist thinkers and Latin American feminist thinkers, because intersectional feminism is attentive to systems of power. So we wanted to really interrogate what are the underlying power dynamics in data annotation systems, and how do we start thinking about changing those. And there's also been a lot of great work in feminist AI, specifically applying some of the thoughts of some of the lineage of feminist thought to AI specifically. One example of this is our collaborator, Catherine D'Ignazio's book, Data Feminism, along with Lauren Klein. It's a great introduction to the topic that I highly recommend. So when we start thinking about feminist AI, we start thinking about power, we start asking these questions. Who decides what data to actually include? Who actually creates that data? Do people who produce the data know how their data is being used? Who owns the system? What kinds of data might be missing? So for example, data about feminicide, and why is that data missing? So feminist AI is really trying to, traditional AI often tries to remove data from its context, standardize it, sanitize it, but feminist approaches are trying to bring that messiness and that context back in. And then in addition to asking those questions, we're also trying to build things that challenge power. So we can think about how do we create data where the labor is actually visible? How do we annotate data that really attends to differences across contexts? It also means trying to think about what we build in the first place and aiming to build systems that serve people with less power in society. So for example, a typical AI system in the workplace may often be built for surveillance, so to measure how efficient workers are being. But instead, a feminist approach to AI might ask what systems could support less powerful workers to collectively fight for better working conditions. So then, and I'll briefly talk about this, but I'll let Yuja talk about this a little bit more when she talks about our specific approach. But basically, we tried to go into this process thinking about, okay, we want a more feminist approach to data annotation. And that started with sort of thinking about all of those steps that I mentioned earlier, doing those together with developers, researchers, annotators, thinking about annotation as a really valuable expertise, the process of annotation as including people with valuable expertise in the context and really highlighting that expertise, and making these decisions around system purpose, categories of interest, collectively and with kind of ongoing dialogue and collaboration, not in like a very isolated way. So now I'll pass it over to you, Jet, to talk about more of the details.
Thanks, Harini. Yeah, as Harini mentioned, we're really thinking about how to apply these great work from a feminist philosophy and feminist AI to the way we collect data set about good and bad practices of new reporting of feminicides. So yeah, how are we going to approach this? We're really inspired by feminist movements from both contemporary and historical times. So historically, feminists have been building spaces that facilitate community building, collective dialogue, and care. For example, on the image from the left, we're showing Latin America feminist encuentros, where women across Latin America are gathered together to debate critical issues and build communities or networks to fight oppression. And there are also more contemporary examples. On the right is the Make Breast Pump Not Suck hackathon, where people are brought together to imagine innovation about breast pumping while fostering this joy and community among themselves. So drawing on both examples and many more others, we are thinking about curating spaces that also foster this kind of collective dialogue, knowledge sharing, and communities by organizing what we call data annotation workshops. So what does our workshop look like? So we like we said, wanted to center on community voices and those who are closer to the context. So we are organizing many workshops in three different languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, because that's where a lot of our partners of Data Against Feminicide speak. So during these workshops, we brought together around 45 participants from 25 countries that are journalists, editors, activists, scholars, or students. So people with a lot of direct or indirect expertise in feminicide reporting and gender-related violence. So we started off this process with an introductory workshop where everybody who speak different languages are brought together. But then we realized that reporting of feminicide is so different across these languages and geographic regions. And because of that reason, we decided to separate the languages and continue with more language-specific workshops so we can poke even more the language and regional differences between feminicide reporting. And during the workshops, we would build capacity around both data and AI, as well as what is journalism and reporting. And people will read and annotate news articles about feminicide, often contributed by themselves from their respective regions. And in small groups, they will discuss the articles, what they think about the good and bad practices in that, and what are some of the regional and cultural nuances about reporting that's reflected in the article. And I'll show you what that looks like right now. So here is a screenshot or video of what that interface is looking like when people are in the workshop. So we're using a open source annotation platform called Label Studio. Let me try to pause it here. So yeah, so here you can see that on the left side is a news article, and on the right side, these are the taxonomy that corresponds to good and bad practices. So during the workshops, our participants would join small groups where they would first read the articles individually, and you can see they can highlight specific phrases or sentences that corresponds to a good or bad practice. And after they do that individually, they are going to discuss in groups about what they annotated for and what are the things that we're missing from that. For example, I think one of the participants were saying in Venezuela, it's really important to cover the age of the victim for legal reasons. So that was something that wasn't in the taxonomy, but were brought up by the participants after reading the stories. Yeah, so from organizing all of these workshops, that we realize is that a lot of these design choices are probably generalizable to people who are also interested in making annotation process more feminist and participatory. So drawing from ideas of participatory design, data feminism, ethics of care, as well as a lot of the experiences of our own practice, we've distilled 5 principles of that for making data annotation more participatory. And let me walk through each of those. So the first one is acknowledging labor. So this would go beyond just paying people. So as Elena and Isa both mentioned, there is a lot of emotional labor on top of the intellectual and physical labor associated with data annotation in general, but in specifically our work of reading like violent and traumatic content. So this principle is about recognizing and crediting annotators' experience. So on top of monetary compensation, we in the workshops are creating spaces of breathing exercises, moments of remembrance, and care to around among the participants to collectively heal the trauma from reading these articles. We're also thinking about other ways to credit their expertise from a public recognition or other ways. And the second principle is to create multiple depth of dialogue. And what do we mean by this? So rather than traditional annotation procedures, as Harini mentioned, that limits annotators' role to just labeling data, we hope that we can create different ways for people to get involved, from contributing news articles from their regions, annotating articles, refining taxonomies, designing tools, or even to facilitate some of the discussions during the workshops. So we want to emphasize that more quantity of participation is not necessarily better, because we all recognize that more participation entails a lot of material and emotional demands, and we recognize that not everybody has the capacity to be heavily involved in all parts of this procedure. So our design process is to create these possibilities, but to facilitate people choose their level of engagement based on their own interest and capacity. So the third principle is to embrace pluralistic voices, and that would mean to really valued the domain expertise that everyone is bringing to this project, to embracing the disagreements, because oftentimes they reflect real life tensions or cultural differences that we might not be thinking about. And the fourth principle is to rebalance epistemic hierarchies. And what do we mean by that? And that is to break the traditional top-down knowledge production cycle and to facilitate multiple ways of knowledge exchange and production. So for example, in the workshops, we as the researchers of computer science would share a lot of the things about data work and machine learning, whereas our participants are very graciously sharing their knowledge about responsible reporting, journalism, and gender-based violence, etc. And last but not least, to foster community building. As we mentioned earlier, we are hoping to use workshops as a methodology to create spaces beyond just annotating articles, to bring people together and foster dialogue, support, and care. So for example, participants in the groups would share how they would cope with the traumatic experience after reading articles, like meditation or others, to really help each other out throughout the process. So yeah, while
I point out, since we're at 12:50, I want to make sure people have time to talk. Maybe we like flash the brainstorming, or you should go ahead. I just wanted to let you know about the time and let you decide.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Rainey. I'm going to quickly go over the challenges. And yeah, I'll definitely make sure people have time for questions. So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that while we have this framework that really helped our design process for these workshops, we do want to recognize that these are more abstract of principles, and there were difficulties with thinking about how to implement them during our workshops. For example, when we were first designing the workshop, we started out with all three languages together. And while we still have language breakout rooms, the materials were developed in English and translated. And that translation process really results in a loss of meaning for a lot of the concepts that don't directly map to a different language. So we realized that we wanted to further foster that pluralism by separating the languages. But even within that, like, people who speak English also have different cultural contexts to consider. So that's something that we've been thinking about. And another issue is to think about what does it mean to actually acknowledge labor. We know that we wanted to compensate like participants, but since people are like all over the world, there are different labor conditions and payment infrastructure. And in practice, we realize it's actually really hard to pay people across the globe. So yeah, if people have done something like that, you can also feel free to share your experience. That's something we really need. But yeah, beyond that, we're also thinking about how do we build that mutual beneficial relationship just beyond the monetary compensation, and what do people actually need? And there are also other open questions about how do we use these disagreements into the traditional technical side of things, or how does this process even scale? We're now doing this with maybe around 50 participants, and we're creating a small data set, but would this participatory approach still work at scale if we are hoping to do a larger data set? And what does scale even mean when we're engaging with these partners? So yeah, lastly, I'm going to talk about how we're planning to use this data, because I'm sure that's something that you've been wondering. So by the end of this stage, this data is capturing a lot of nuances about feminicide reporting, right? And we ultimately want to use this data to develop some sort of AI tools that either, for example, help journalists incorporate best practices or help activists detect or raise awareness of harmful reporting. But at this stage, we're intentionally slow about it because we wanted to keep the collaborative and collective nature of this work and keep having conversations with our partners about what tool we wanted to make. And we don't want to make something that nobody would use. So we really want to make sure that this process is iterative and collaborative. And with that, I just wanted to end by showing a animation of a brainstorming session we had during the workshops where people were generating ideas about what they want the data set to be used for. And you can see that it's really fascinating to have all these many ideas. So this is hopefully just the beginning of a very long and rewarding process to co-design something that's going to be used in newsrooms, activist groups, and all of that. And we hope that this walkthrough of the project would give an example of exploring how to use feminist principles into the development of AI systems. Yeah, and I will end here and open for questions.
Thank you so much, to all four of you, and again, all the collaborators and the teams that are standing with you all. I've been so excited to bring your work here. You can see the appreciation in the chat and the emojis, because I think it is exactly what you were just mentioning. Not only is the specific content and the process so important, but I do think that you are demonstrating a gold standard in what this can look like for other subject matter experts as well, for other content. I've attended, I'm many decades along and I've attended a lot of so-called like collaborative or co-design processes, and I have never attended any that are as actually co-design and collaborative as the work that this project is doing. And that's why I knew immediately that we had to do whatever it would take to get you to this community so that we could expose like a genuine collaborative and co-design process. So thank you so much. And yes, if you're in the room, this is your opportunity to ask a question. We're in a Zoom meeting, so if you want to turn your microphone on and share a reflection, make a comment, or ask a question, this is your time to do that. And there's enough, we're a small enough group today that if you want to simply turn your microphone on, you don't have to do anything formal. You can just do that. I will leave some space. Hi, Amy.
Morning. Thank you so much. I'm mind blown. Just about, I so appreciate the process and the products and toolkits you're developing. And Heather, you kind of alluded to this. I bet you have a lot of demand in other domains. Like I'm thinking police related violence and how that's reported. Just, and I completely appreciate you wanting to be thoughtful about how the process rolls out, but just wondering about any conversations you've had about like expanding the scope. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if you meant expanding the scope like beyond feminicide reporting, or to, I guess there's different ways of thinking about what that might mean. But I think in some ways we have, because I do think this is like, and maybe Elena and Isa, you can speak more to like the scope of the Data Against Feminicide project too, because it feels like it's an issue that arises across not only feminicide, but other human rights violations. But of course, there are important differences across the different kinds of problems too.
Yeah, I think, well, feminicide is a very broad category, and it includes all sorts of nuanced forms of that it can take. And there are many groups that are already exploring particular intersectional categories. So, for example, police violence against Black women is one of the categories that some groups are looking at. Indigenous women, somebody mentioned in the chat, murder and missing Indigenous women, Two-Spirit people. That's there are groups who are working on those issues that are using our tools. What we have found is that the more granular you want it to get, so to put it in a more kind of schematic way, the more intersectional categories you want to add to your monitoring, then the harder it gets for two reasons. So the main reason is the sources. So if you're doing monitoring of the media as a main source of your information, then as I said before, the media do not cover everything. And the more intersectional categories there are, the less likely it is you will get covered. And the second is technical. So we're talking about training AI systems. And so this is why this project is really interesting, is to see how, as Yuja mentioned, for example, that we realized quite early on, actually, that we couldn't just work on a global training of news reporting. First of all, because reporting happens very differently in different languages. And even in those languages, it will not, the reporting tone, the language use will not be the same, whatever, in Scotland and in South Africa, even though both are English-speaking countries, right? So the more contextual you want to get, then the more contextually you have to train. And so these are the things that we're exploring in this project. And having said that, there are groups that are using our tools, particularly the email alerts, in the understanding that it's, if they do a broad monitoring, they can then filter out from that monitoring the categories. But yeah, sorry, there is no answer yet. This is the question you raise is it's one of the uncomfortable places we're inhabiting to try and work out what the best way forward is. But thank you for the question. That's always good to go there.
Just to add that I've put on the chat a couple of resources in of papers that we've written that addressed some of this questions and could be of interest to everyone.
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much. And for people who have to leave, who have to jump because lunch hour is over or breakfast is over, we will put all of those resources in an accessible way into that data equity community forum. So I know that we have just really heard the broadest strokes about the really deep and nuanced and thoughtful work that the four of you and your teams are doing. And it just genuinely means the world to me that you took time to come and share it with us today. And it was everything I had hoped. And we will absolutely, as a community, continue to find ways to support your project and continue to find ways to incorporate your best practices into the projects that we're working on. So thank you so much for all of your work, and we'll stay in touch. As I mentioned in the chat, for people who are regular attendees, I'm getting on a canoe and going out into the Canadian wilderness. So we won't be here for 2 weeks, but we're back on September 5th, assuming that all goes well. So I really appreciate it. Everybody take really good care of yourselves and really good care of each other. And have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
So much.
Thank you, Heather. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was amazing.
You're welcome.